reduction effort that's currently going on and has really been completed at this point. And then we have that base system conditions analysis. So from an existing data collection standpoint, the key pieces of information that we try to gather with any of these studies are existing turning movement counts. So at the intersection level, understanding what do our traffic volumes look like, what do our ped volumes look like, and what do our bike volumes look like. In addition to that, we also pulled 5-year historical crash data to understand trends, different things that we're seeing from a safety perspective. All of that, plus the intersection geometry and the signal timing within the study area feed into that as existing conditions. When we start to think about our base system conditions, I already mentioned we're looking at our existing year, which is 2025 in this case, and what does the system look like as a whole within the community under current conditions. Then we'll move into our future conditions. So we'll look at future year 2050 no build. This is essentially our do nothing scenario. So if nothing were to change other than just background growth in the area, what would the system look like in the future? And then we have our build conditions, also 2050, and all of our build scenarios that we're going to be looking at as part of this study will assume that the land bridge has been constructed. So that's kind of that base assumption for future conditions. Next slide. Where is our study area? So when we think about the study area as a whole, the area outlined in the green is really kind of the core area that we're looking at. It's bounded by University Avenue to the north. We've got Selby Avenue to the south, Marion Street to the east, north of 94, and then Western also to the east, kind of south of 94, and then Hamlin Avenue to the west. The circles that you're seeing on the screen, those blue circles, those are our study intersections. So those are the locations where we're really going to dive in from an operations perspective. We will look at other operations outside of those kind of on the segments, but really the core of the look, or the core of the effort that we're going through will focus on those intersections as a whole. So start from an existing conditions standpoint. I mentioned the first thing we look at is crash history. So I kind of want to set the stage from a terminology standpoint before we kind of dive into this. So I have 4 different things that we usually look at from a rate perspective. Of course, crash rate is our first one here. At an intersection level, that's the number of crashes per million entering vehicles. So we look at the total number of crashes, how many million entering vehicles there are, and then we can kind of run the numbers there to produce that crash rate. Another piece that we look at is our fatal and serious injury rate, or FAR. And those are the number of crashes per 100 million vehicle miles. So a little bit different. Fatal and serious injury crashes are significantly less from a total number than the total number of crashes, which is a good thing. And so that's why we divide it by that 100 million instead of the per million. Then the last 2, we have our statewide average crash rate. This is really the average crash rate, at least based on local data or MnDOT data. And that takes into account number of lanes, number of vehicles, is an intersection versus a segment, and then the location as well, urban versus suburban, or rural even in that case too. And the last one is our critical crash rate. So this is that statistically adjusted crash rate. And that really takes into account kind of the randomness of crashes, the random nature of crashes. And if we have an area where our crash rate exceeds that critical crash rate, those are considered statistically significant areas of concern or crash issues. So those are kind of the key things to keep in mind as we walk through the rest of these slides. For the existing data, we collected from January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2024. Within that 5-year window, we had just over 1,100 crashes. Of those 1,100, we had 591 that were considered at an intersection, and we had about 524 that were considered at the segment level. So those are non-intersection related crashes kind of between intersections. Some statistics that I want to touch on, 55% of those crashes were considered hit and run crashes, and approximately 15% of the crashes involved parked vehicles. So just a couple of things to kind of think about as we work through this. For the ped bike piece, really wanted to highlight, go back one, Keith, sorry. Oh, that's all right. For the ped bike piece, wanted to note the trend that we're seeing here on the screen. So these are the ped bike crashes within our study area, within the Rondo area. And we see this trend kind of going up over time from 2020 through 2024. This is unfortunately a trend that we're seeing nationally and locally within the state as well. And so just want to make folks aware that we're seeing that same trend that crashes are increasing for our most vulnerable road users. And those crashes are really kind of focused on University Avenue, Lexington, and Dale Street, as well as other locations within the area. Next slide. So here from a crash history perspective, this is starting to look at where do we have those issues? Where are we seeing some crash problems? So on here might be a little hard to see, but locations that are flagged with red circles or red lines, those are locations where we have crash rates that exceed that critical crash rate that we talked about. So these are locations where we have a statistically significant crash issue. And one thing that you'll notice is that a lot of our crashes are kind of or issues where we have those statistically significant issues. Those are really kind of bound within the core of the Rondo neighborhood area and around where that land bridge is proposed. One other thing to note on this slide, anywhere where you see kind of a red car symbol or a red pedestrian symbol, those are locations where we had fatal vehicle crashes or fatal ped bike crashes. So again, just want to make sure that we're drawing our attention to those areas. Next slide, please. So what does all this mean? So when we think about all of the data that we're pulling in as part of our crash analysis, what are some of those key takeaways? 47% of our crashes would be considered behavioral crashes. So these are parked vehicle crashes, hit and run crashes, kind of pointing to a behavioral issue or behavioral pattern within the area. That cars parked along the streets are getting hit more often than we'd like to see, and the hit and run piece also is something to kind of think about and consider as we move forward. That critical crash rates exceeded. A lot of those locations where we have those critical crash rates getting exceeded are on those neighborhood streets. They're on the streets that people are using every day, whether it's walking or biking or going to wherever they need to. It's those streets that they're using quite often. And that's something that we want to make sure we pay attention to as we move forward. Of the 30 fatalities and serious injury crashes that were looked at within the study area, 14 of those were peds and bikes. So again, really hitting home that our most vulnerable users were seeing heightened crashes leading to severe and fatal injuries, or severe injury and fatal crashes for those peds and bikes. So where do we want to focus moving forward? One thing is speed and just improving safety as a whole. So we'll see on the next slide here, one of the things that we looked at was speed within the neighborhoods, really those kind of east-west streets within the Rondo neighborhood. And some of the trends that we're seeing here are concerning. Most of those corridors are 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. We've got a couple that are 25, but in general, both our average speed and our 85th percentile speed exceeds the speed limit. So for those 85th percentile speeds, that's really that speed at which that captures 85% of the vehicles that are traveling past that location. And we're seeing 85th percentile speeds upwards of 10 to 15 miles per hour above the speed limit. Keep in mind that, of course, this doesn't account for those top 15% as well. So there are vehicles that are traveling even faster than what we're seeing in that 85th percentile speeds. Next slide, please, Keith. The other piece as we go through here is the multimodal piece as well. So again, seeing those crash rates, seeing those impacts to our most vulnerable road users. We also want to look at, do we have any gaps? Do we have sidewalk gaps? Where are our trails? Where are our bike lanes? One thing I just want to note on here, I know it's a little hard to see, but there is a dashed red line kind of in the bottom right-hand corner of our study area. That is a sidewalk gap. So that's a location where we currently don't have any kind of ped or bike facilities in that area. And within the neighborhood itself, there really isn't a whole lot other than just sidewalks. And so those are things that we want to kind of keep in mind, particularly when we focus in on that land bridge area as well, moving through the process. Next slide, please, Keith. I'm going to change gears a little bit. So we're going to move away from the crash history side of the world and the ped bike side of the world, and we're going to move into the vehicular piece. So this is from a level of service perspective at an intersection level. This is kind of our key metric to understand what's going on in our system as a whole. Level of service is the average number of seconds that a vehicle has to wait to complete their movement. And how we do this, we represent it by a letter grade, similar to school. Level of service A is good. And in that case, we're seeing minimal delay. Folks are able to make those movements relatively easily, whether it's a signal or it's a side street stop controlled intersection. And then level of service E or F is kind of that bad side, right? It's the opposite end of the spectrum where we're seeing excessive delay. So when we start to talk about locations where we have level of service E or level of service F, those are locations where drivers are going to start to make unsafe decisions. They're going to start accepting shorter gaps, and that could lead to additional crashes or near misses within at the intersections and within the Rondo area. Next slide, please. So from a traffic perspective, we really focus in on two different peaks. We focus in on the AM peak hour, which is generally going to be back one. Sorry, Keith, there it goes. The AM peak hour is generally kind of in that 7 to 9 a.m. time frame. That's really when folks are starting to go to work. And then we have also the PM peak hour, which is kind of when everybody comes home from work or comes home from wherever they were for the day. The AM peak, we do have some locations where we're starting to see some operational issues. Really what you're looking for on this figure is anywhere where we have a red circle or a red line. And so those red circles, those are locations where we're seeing level of service E or F at an intersection level from an overall perspective. And then locations where we see those red lines, that's where we have queuing that either exceeds 300 feet or impacts an adjacent intersection. So those are those locations that we want to focus on. Next slide, please, Keith. Shifting, the first slide was the AM peak, so kind of shifting to the PM peak now. We do see additional locations. We start to have some orange circles pop up, which is level of service D. We have a few extra of those red lines that start popping up on here, so we have some additional queuing issues. From our perspective, from a traffic standpoint, this is pretty consistent with what we expect to see as you look at the AM peak versus a PM peak. AM peak, relatively spread out. Folks are going to work at different times, dropping kids off at school at different times. Whereas the PM peak, everything kind of happens all at once, right? Folks are getting their kids picked up from school, they're running errands, and they're coming home from work kind of more all at the same time. And so typically we see worse operations during the PM peak, and that's what we're seeing here as well within the Rondo community. Next slide, please, Keith. So that's really focusing in from an existing conditions standpoint. And so that's a lot of that. We take all of that information in, we start to tell a story. A lot of this information, as I mentioned earlier, is going to feed into that NEPA process and help define the purpose and need of the land bridge as well. And I think give a plug for a future webinar here. I believe we got one coming down the pipeline on the environmental side as well. But when we move from existing conditions and we go into those future conditions, how do we look at the traffic volumes, the ped and bike volumes? How are those things going to change as we move into the future? And really, our starting point is the existing and the 2050 socioeconomic data. So, Metropolitan Council, essentially within each of the transportation analysis zones or TAZs, they kind of set what the existing number of households, the population, and the employment or the number of jobs are within a particular zone. And then they set essentially targets or what those numbers are going to be for that same zone in the future. And so we can look at the change in that data to understand how are the trips going to change coming out of that zone? How is that going to influence the traffic volumes on the roadway network? In addition to that SE data, we also look at the future proposed transportation network and any major investment projects that are going to happen. So is there a new roadway connection being made? Is there a conversion happening? So if, let's say a 4-lane roadway to a 3-lane roadway, Is there a new bus line that's gonna take place? Is there an additional light rail line? All of these different things that can change how people travel from a day-to-day perspective. We can take a lot of that into account into our forecast model. And I already mentioned those transportation analysis zones that feed into the traffic forecasting effort. So we're going to be taking all of this data into account from a forecasting perspective, and we're essentially going to say, here's what we think the roadway system is going to look like in the future from a volume perspective. Once we have that information, there's a handful of things that we can do with it. We can look at long range transportation plans, we can do regional level analyses, or we can get down to the project level. That's what we're going to be doing as we move through this process for the traffic study, is really diving into that project level analysis and what it means for the community as a whole. So we'll be able to look at those different build scenarios that we talked about and understand what that means. Before I turn it over to Jana, I just want to leave everybody with an illustration of kind of what the land bridge could look like. And what I specifically want to point out on here is you'll notice within that land bridge area, there is some redevelopment shown in here. There's some new apartments or townhomes or retail or community spaces shown around the edges of the land bridge. The process that we're going to be going through for this project will try to take a lot of that into account as well. And so we want to understand if there's connections made across 94 or over 94 as part of the land bridge, or what types of land use changes there are as well. We want to take all of that information into account to really understand what does that mean for the community as a whole, and what does it mean for the Rondo area and the surrounding area around the Rondo neighborhood. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Jana to kick us off into the air quality discussion.
Thank you, Justin. Next, we'll jump into a topic I'm quite passionate about. What's the meaning of air quality? Why should we care? And what is this studying doing? To start, air quality is the condition of air in terms of the presence of pollutants and how suitable it is for human health and the environment. Breathing clean, unpolluted air is essential for maintaining good health and quality of life. It directly supports multiple systems in the human body and is a cornerstone of public health. Maintaining clean air through pollution control, green spaces, and sustainable transportation is vital for both individual and community health. On the flip side, those most at risk of health problems related to bad air quality are people with respiratory or heart diseases, infants, children, and adults over 65, people in poverty and those who lack access to healthcare, those who smoke or are exposed to secondhand smoke, people working with high exposure to contaminated air, and those who spend a lot of time near busy roadways. ReConnect Rondo's goal is to better understand how transportation-related air quality varies across the neighborhood, both now and in the future. This study's air quality process is made up of 5 major components. The first part is key staff here at SRF, including Justin and I, as well as ReConnect Rondo staff, plus our analyst and our environmental planning expert that are also working behind the scenes. The second is collecting existing air quality data and measurements using state agency hosted resources, as well as new sources of data using purple air sensors. I'll explain more about purple air and what it is on the next slide. The next component is involvement from state agencies that regulate or study air quality in Minnesota. A large component of this process involves modeling emissions using a software created by the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA. This air quality modeling software is called the Motor Vehicle Emissions Simulator, which is often abbreviated to MOVES. And last but certainly not least, an important piece of this process is documentation and education. Now, what exactly is purple air? Purple air is a network of small outdoor air quality sensors that help people and communities understand the air around them. These sensors measure particulate matter, allowing communities to track air quality and pollution levels at the neighborhood level in real time. Particulate matter is defined as solid particles suspended in the air, which includes dust, smoke, pollen, and other organic as well as inorganic particles. It primarily comes from transportation and industry sources. The sensor that we'll be using for this study is pictured here, and the data collected from them supports publicly accessible air quality mapping, local pollution monitoring, and even scientific research. A nearby example of purple air that's currently being used is by the city of Minneapolis for their community air monitoring project, which launched back in 2021. Here we have a flow chart for this study's air quality process. Our first step was to request participation from the Minnesota Department of Transportation, the State Pollution Control Agency, and the State Department of Health. The Pollution Control Agency and Department of Transportation both agreed to be part of the study, and our team had an initial meeting with them back in February to introduce and discuss the study. Right now, we're working through determining locations for the purple air sensors, with ReConnect Rondo reaching out directly to schools, churches, and community organizations. Existing data collection will come next, using the sensors as well as publicly available air quality data from the Pollution Control Agency and the Department of Health. Then we'll compare air quality modeling. We'll complete that air quality modeling of existing conditions using the motor vehicle emission simulator. As I earlier mentioned, abbreviated is MOVES. Modeling the future no build condition will follow that. And after that, we'll model each of the future build alternatives that Justin had mentioned. All of the MOVES modeling will use traffic data generated as part of this study. And pending a finalized methodology, we then plan to convert the MOVES data to air quality indices, also known as AQI. If you could go back to the previous slide, Keith. One couple more things here to note. AQI is a standardized system that shows how polluted the air is, and it's the metric you probably see most often for air quality, typically shown in your smartphone's weather app or map application. And then the final step of the process in this flow chart here is to develop a findings report and communicate those findings, all while continuing to have an agency feedback loop throughout. Next slide, please. Pictured here is a screenshot of Purple Air's online interactive map. Currently, there are no sensors in the Rondo neighborhood. However, the goal of this study is to change that. Anyone can easily visit the website at purpleair.com/map. The goal is also for folks to be able to see the AQI data and locations online. Our next steps for the air quality process of this study are to determine the exact sensor locations at various locations throughout the neighborhood, Rondo neighborhood, and then install them by the end of spring. We're going to finalize our proposed air quality modeling methodology and then hold the second agency meeting with the Department of Transportation and the Pollution Control Agency. After that, we'll complete the air quality modeling for existing conditions, the future no build or the do nothing scenario, and the future build alternatives. And then our final step will be to document everything and share our findings out to the study team, agencies, stakeholders, and the community. And that is the end of the presentation. We're happy to